The production of this video was made possible by donors to the Orchestration Online Patreon initiative. Please consider adding your support to the creation of free educational internet resources by visiting our Patreon page linked below.
Hey there, this is your orchestration tutor Thomas Goss, bringing you a preview chapter from my upcoming book, 100 Last Orchestration Tips, all about blending the tone of oboes and clarinets. Despite much conflicting evidence on the topic, oboe and clarinet can blend quite effectively in unison, but the combination may require a certain degree of skill by the players and craft by the orchestrator, depending on the degree of exposure and quality of phrasing. As is sometimes the case in much quoted but often debunked orchestration advice, the source of a claim can be hard to pin down. For instance, the claim that oboe and clarinet shouldn't be doubled may occasionally crop up on social media, but few, if any, really know who originally gave that advice. Was it Samuel Adler? Actually, if you go to the first few pages of his woodwind scoring chapter from the study of orchestration, this is one of the first things he debunks, with beautifully justified arguments and examples. And yet he also extends the mystery with the assertion that,
in every orchestration book, the student is told not to use this doubling in a melody,
with reasons given of the oboe's pungency, the conductor needing to balance the two instruments, and difficulties maintaining proper intonation. Well, what were those other orchestration books? Piston, as some claim? Looking over his 1955 book Orchestration, though, reveals that Walter Piston imparted no such caveats, and even recommended the combination of oboe plus clarinet as providing
the best rhythmic staccato.
Then what about Rimsky-Korsakov, in his extensive study of melodic combinations and principles of orchestration? Once again, the record contradicts common knowledge, with the master phrasing the combination as having
a fuller quality than that of either instrument heard separately. The dark, nasal tone of the oboe will prevail in the low register, the bright chest quality of the clarinet in the high compass.
And I entirely agree with this perspective, the overused cliché of calling the oboe nasal notwithstanding. The easiest way to debunk the original claim is to just look at the repertoire, which reveals a plethora of oboe plus clarinet combinations in many different situations, registers, and dynamic levels, sometimes within the same extended work. The better crafted, the more effective the scoring. But this doesn't necessarily mean that the claim is entirely wrong. My suspicion is that the caution originated with players and conductors, focusing on the specific problem of exposed melodic doubling of one oboe with one clarinet, and from there may have been misinterpreted by some developing orchestrators to mean every possible combination of the two instruments. So let's start with that original concern, because it does have some validity, as certain incompatibilities are baked into the tone production, timbre, intonation, and registers between the two instrument types. Combining the ranges of both instruments into one chart, we see that the unique registers of each don't really consolidate with any regularity. One of the richest spots in the oboe's low register, between the pitches of E4 and G-sharp 4, are also those of the B-flat clarinet's paler throat tones. The A clarinet's throat tones are positioned a half step lower, from E-flat 4 to G4. Below this, the clarinet's beautifully subtle, rich chalumeau register combines a bit awkwardly with the oboe's ever-expanding muscularity and broadness of tone. all the way down to the oboe's penetrating bottom note of B-flat 3. The clarinet can match these low oboe notes with a great amount of directness, of course, and very effectively so in tutti passages and mixed chorales. But exposed unisons can miss a lot of the individual character and sensitivity of either instrument, both down low and across the throat tones. Softer, more sensitive passages might present many balance problems. At the other end of their combined ranges, the altissimo register of the oboe starts to harden, thin out, and finally squelch, right where the clarinet's altissimo register becomes more incisive and piercing. This imbalance starts mildly at around the sounding pitch of E-flat 6, and becomes ever more pronounced and irreconcilable from there. So the dependable range of exposed melodic unison pitches starts at the lowest clarino pitch, sounding A4 for B-flat clarinet and G-sharp 4 for A clarinet, and ascends to up around sounding D6 for both instruments. Of course, a beautifully written unison passage could easily exceed these boundaries by a couple of semitones on either side as needed. But we can say with a degree of certainty that this area puts the least amount of stress on the two players in merging their two timbres. They'll be able to easily compensate for minor issues of balance and radiance between them. However, this calculation is just the beginning of the problem. We must ask why the orchestrator wants this combined timbre in the first place, when each individual instrument could perform a solo with much greater subtlety and individuality when left to themselves. Any combination of timbres, especially between two wind instruments, subtracts a degree of unique character from either. As Walter Piston so wisely and succinctly puts it,
two instruments playing in unison reinforce each other, but at the same time each tends to cancel some of the intensity of the other's tone.
There's the added problem that the oboe's timbre produces the full spectrum of overtones, while the clarinet only produces odd-numbered overtones. This creates real problems in very sensitive passages with the players adjusting their precise intonation to one another, as their overtones will only match above each played pitch on the octave and a fifth, 2 octaves and a major third, and then the somewhat out-of-tune 2 octaves and a minor seventh. Finally, since clarinet avoids fast vibrato, the oboist must match their straighter tone for a seamless unison. Otherwise, the difference between the two players becomes quite pronounced. It helps if the dynamic is softer, so that the natural tendencies of protuberant timbres don't create a constant minefield of balance issues to sort. But when the combination is scored well, the advantages of exploring a new timbre immediately become apparent. We need go no further in well-known repertoire than Schubert's Eighth Symphony, the Unfinished, to see a standout example of unison oboe and clarinet in an exposed duo. Notice how Schubert ticks all of our boxes quite well, as if he were reading this tip over my shoulder. Well-placed pitch range combining the oboe's sweet spot with the clarinet's clarino register. A nicely crafted melodic curve that allows for either instrument to compensate for the occasional imbalance of projection or richness of tone. And a softer dynamic that allows for a mutual sense of subtlety between seasoned players, even with the oboist holding back quite a bit on their vibrato. Rimsky-Korsakov was fond of this combination, and he quotes a handful of examples from his own operas in Principles of Orchestration. These don't have the same sheer exquisite approach as Schubert, but illustrate a brighter, blunter strategy in which a broader range is assumed, with less subtlety and tone shaping at stake. Unfortunately, his examples are often set against vocal solos and choral episodes, so sometimes it's harder to isolate the precise qualities, especially in the older live recordings from decades ago. If one of each can work this well, why not all available oboes and clarinets combined? This strategy shows up from time to time in romantic scoring, such as in Rimsky-Korsakov's Invisible City of Kitezh. It's an intriguing sound, the harder, more trumpet-like tone of unison oboes combined with the phased but rich sound of triple clarinets, altogether creating a very bright, somewhat urgent tone. The more the orchestrator abandons highlighted unisons between two players, the greater the possible extent of combinations. The range of doubled tones can be extended downwards with much greater freedom in more complex scoring, when such doubling isn't presented with any special focus for the listener. Thus, works like Holst's Planets are rife with combined oboe and clarinet pitches. In this excerpt from Jupiter, Holst scores triple oboes and clarinets, with much of the passage lying across the clarinet's throat tones. This results in a fatter, more oboe-focused tone, but the purpose here isn't to create a perfect balance, but to manifest a certain color, with the oboe's overtones adding strength to the flutes above, and the clarinets spicing up the piccolos and glockenspiel an octave higher. Just add pizzicato, and a uniquely pointy passage results. Unison melodic oboes and clarinets supporting strings results in an almost surreally powerful tone, with the cutting edge of clarinets plus strings, and the warm radiance of oboes plus strings. In this excerpt, Holst positions triple oboes and clarinets alongside first and second violins, an octave higher than a triple unison of English horn, bass clarinet, and bassoon supporting violas and cellos. The balance of elements is perfect. This combination can also add color and weight behind brass melodies, helping trumpets and horns make a firm statement without shouting down the rest of the orchestra. In this section of Mercury, Holst combines doubled oboes with triple clarinets and violas, supporting first and second trumpets ringing out against a counter melody in the rest of the orchestra, then returning a few bars later an octave lower to thicken and mellow out the four-horn unison echo. This also helps the overall texture transition to the mixed color under the flutes and violins that bring down the energy of this passage. For thick, full-throated power, there's nothing like throwing all the horns, strings, oboes, and clarinets together in one decisive statement. Here, Holst scores a unison of all oboe family members, including English horn and bass oboe, all three clarinets in their upper Chalumeau register, all six horns in their optimum range, and unison strings, with that added kick of all the violins digging away at their lowest, thickest fourth string. The result is a truly awesome tone. Even with all these great examples of melodic passages, The truth is that the most common oboe to clarinet combination is in doubling harmony in tutis, or under thematic gestures in other instruments. Tchaikovsky in particular has page after page of such scoring, often filling in the space between the horns and the trumpets, or between the brass and the upper strings and flutes. As to Holst's planets, there are also many great examples, the most exposed of which occurs in Venus, where pulsing oboe and clarinet chords provide a foundation for soulful violin octaves. Notice the unison of second horn with English horn. This helps to even out any inconsistencies of timbre between the two woodwind families. Horns are, in fact, a great stabilizing influence on oboes and clarinets, helping to fill in missing partials in clarinets while underlining their leaner tone on the one hand, while lending a certain brightness and emphasis to oboes on the other. Here, in this remarkable isolated chord from Saturn, Holst scores a stack of perfect fourths in the horns, doubling bass clarinet at the bottom, then bass oboe, followed above by English horn plus third clarinet, 2 second chairs each of oboe and clarinet, and then first players sharing a top-sounding G. The result is a beautiful glowing sonority, in which the clarinets and oboes blend seamlessly with the tone of the horns. Shared oboe and clarinet harmonies can have a similar effect on strings that we saw melodically with that previous Jupiter excerpt. In cases like this one, spread out across the string section, with each harmonized pitch gaining the clarinet's cutting power and the oboe's warmth. Like before, the horns play a role in adding timbral unity and a bit of punchy articulation. And, of course, adding bassoons to the cellos and basses keeps their strength and color consistent. And if you just keep looking, you'll find dozens, even hundreds of similar examples in other great works. The lesson here is that sometimes advice based on what's considered common knowledge might take some intensive explaining and personal experience with players before you can see it for what it is. But you don't need to make a meme about it, just ask me. Maybe I'll even turn it into an orchestration tip.